Welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1340B, and today's date is July 24th, 2017, and the title of the episode is The Corporate News Propaganda is Masking What's Really Going On. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, the corporate media, they're not going to let up on the Russian collusion thing. They're going to push this until the very, very end. And from many different polls around the country, it's showing that people, they're losing interest in this. They don't really care anymore. But we can see the corporate media, they just want to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Because what is happening right now is they are doing whatever they possibly can to get Trump out of office. That's their main goal. And you can see it. They're filing the impeachment papers. They're doing whatever they possibly can because what's happening behind the scenes, and this is what they really don't want to talk about, everything is being dismantled. And soon these corporate networks that are being funded by the deep state, which are being handed these news stories from intelligence sources, this is all going to disappear. And we're already starting to see this, and I'll get into that in a minute. But what we're seeing is that Jared Kushner, he released an 11-page statement. Now, I'm not a fan of Jared Kushner, and I'm going to put my feelings aside here for a moment. And the statement that was published, he basically maps out, and I'm sure it came from his attorneys, maps out all the different meetings with different Russian individuals. Some were Russian officials like Kislyak and others that he invited in. Others were just Russians. And something very interesting out of this whole thing where he says, listen, I and many others have met with many different individuals. I've met with British individuals. I met with British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, and he is far more senior of a government official than any of the Russians that I met with. And this is all part of the process. Now, again, there's no collusion part in all of this. Who cares if he's meeting with Russians? He's meeting with French officials. He's meeting with British officials. The one thing they can't do is to show any type of collusion where they were planning to do something to rig the election with cyber attacks on the election system and to manipulate. This is that whole part they cannot prove. So they just keep throwing out, he met with a Russian. He met with a Russian official. Well, these individuals during the transition, during the campaign, they met with a lot of different people. It doesn't mean that they're colluding to do something. Now, the real story is the emails with Clinton. The real story is the unmasking of government officials without a warrant. The real story is the spying on a presidential candidate, which is completely illegal. This is the real story. And over the past few months, the story of the Awan brothers has been ignored by the mainstream media because they're too busy on this Russian collusion thing to really look at anything else. And of course, they don't want to report on any of this. Now, these are the Pakistani-born brothers, Abid, Imran, and Jamal, and they're at the center of a criminal investigation by the U.S. Capitol Hill Police and the FBI. Now, the Awan brothers, they were the Pakistani IT specialists who worked for more than 30 House and Senate Democrats, as well as Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, the scandal has raised questions about who may have been passed data which the Awans had access to, given the Pakistan's history of collaborating with a number of foreign countries who have demonstrated past willingness to influence U.S. politics. Now, the twisted plot surrounding the Awan brothers has grown even more interesting as the FBI agents, they just seized a number of smashed computer hard drives from the home of Florida Democrat Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Information Technology Administrator. Now, the Capitol Police have also seized computer equipment tied to the Florida lawmaker. Now, one bombshell that has been completely ignored by the corporate media is that Imran had access to Wasserman Schultz's iPad password, meaning that they had access to the DNC emails. Now, the brothers are accused of removing hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment from congressional offices, including computers and servers, while also running a procurement scheme in which they bought equipment, then overcharged the House Administrative Office that assigned such contracts to members. So the FBI, the Capitol Police, they're really looking into this. And the corporate media, well, they're not reporting on this whatsoever. This should be front page news. All of this, where the unmasking, the email scandal, the smashed hard drives, all of this should be on the front page. All of this should be out there saying, wow, look what has been done here. And these journalists should be out there investigating all this, picking up leads, writing down what really happened. But we don't see any of this. They're fixated on Russian collusion because this is what their handlers are telling them to do. Now, we know that the corporate media and also other social media platforms, they hired Snopes and other fact-checking systems to make sure that you're looking at real news, not the fake news. And we know that these are all run by intelligence operatives also. A lot of them are. Well, it looks like this is also falling apart right now because Snopes right now, well, it looks like they are out of money. It looks like right now their whole entire operation is going down the tubes. Now remember, the co-founder of Snopes was accused of embezzling company money and spending it on prostitutes. Now they're on GoFundMe begging for $500,000. So far, the campaign has raised around $18,000 in 3 hours, and about 710 people donated to this. And it looks like, this whole thing is going down the tubes here because, as we know, these fact-checking systems, they're not really fact-checking. Because if we look in the past and we see all the stories that came out of the corporate media, these fact checkers would have told you that these are true, and then it turns out that these Russian stories are completely fake, phony, and false. So all of this has been ginned up by the deep state, by the intelligence agencies, to make people believe in a certain way. Because what is happening is their entire structure is falling apart right now. And there's nothing they can do about it. They can try to push people into believing what they want, but people will read and look at different sources and say, you know something? This all doesn't make sense. I don't believe this anymore. This is a lie. And people will start to catch on and they'll start to realize what the fake news is. And this is what's happening right now because people are looking at this saying, yeah, none of this makes sense. Now, it looks like Trump is throwing a wrench into the UN plan to replace U.S. population. Now, this is not just happening in the U.S. This is happening out in Europe also, where we see the refugees going into all the different countries, where Obama was bringing in all these refugees or anyone coming over the border into the country. Because the plan was, it was to basically meld everyone together, remove the identity of the country, and have this entire system fit into their globalist agenda. Now, their plan was called replacement migration. It was a UN plot to replace the population of a given country with migrants and refugees from the developing world. The report details the plunging birth rates across Western Europe, Russia, Japan, and the United States, and identifies a solution. Well, we'll just have mass migration from the third world into these aging and declining nations. Now, one of the agendas, by doing this, it helps GDP. The other way is to bring in low-cost workers. Another way is to meld everyone together where people lose the identity of the country. Now, during the time Obama was in office, the plan was to bring in as many refugees as possible. By the end of 2017, they were hoping to have about 110,000 refugee admissions, and that number was supposed to go up over time. Since Trump has been in office and he's been trying to put forth his travel ban, he's been stopping the illegals from coming into the country, this number has dropped to 50,000. That's where it caps off right now. And what we're seeing is that since the recent Supreme Court ruling on Trump's travel ban, it appears Trump has stopped the refugee flow into the United States, at least temporarily. His refugee cap is around 50,000. And it will be like this until next year, where they'll allow another 50,000. Now, the Supreme Court is expected to make a final ruling on Trump's travel ban in October. And remember, when he first started out, the travel ban was very, very strict. And this number was supposed to be a lot lower. But as time went on and the Ninth Circuit Court and all these other judges were saying, no, this is completely against the Constitution, you can't do this, which is completely fake, phony, and false, where he has every right to do this, he had to rewrite it. And we can see this has been very, very tough to get through. But what he has done is he's brought that number almost in half right now and stopped the globalist agenda. So we can see things are happening in the background. It's just that the corporate media, they're not looking at, they don't want anyone to know that this is happening, because they're hoping they're able to get back the narrative, to get rid of Trump, to get the person they want in there. And this is becoming very, very difficult. Now, we understand that the U.S. House, they're imposing new sanctions on Russia. The EU is very angry about this. And there's an EU memo that was leaked, and it says that, listen, if this goes through and there are more sanctions that are placed on Russia, the measures could impact a large number of European companies doing legitimate business with EU measures with Russian entities in railways, financial, shipping, and mining sectors, and the EU is going to take action. And they will retaliate within days, because these sanctions, these are not doing anything. Russia is able to survive with these sanctions. They're just sanctioning individual people. It has no effect on them whatsoever. I mean, it had no effect on Cuba, Iran. They were able to operate for all of these years without the country imploding on itself, because they find different ways to survive. And this is not going to help anyone if they do this. We can see that the deep state, their agenda is to continually push the same agenda no matter what. Now, Duterte in the Philippines, he is out there and he's saying that authorities should put a stop to the extraction and exportation of mineral resources for process abroad and importing them back to the Philippines. He says the Philippines will process the minerals into the finished products within the Philippines rather than abroad. So he's taking back the mineral industry. And we can see right now that the Philippines, they have gold, copper, nickel, chromite, iron, and it looks like he wants control over this. He doesn't want other countries doing this for the Philippines. And we're seeing a lot of countries now where they're out there and they want to take back control of their natural resources. They want to use whatever currency they want to trade with their natural resources. And the central bank, the deep state, they're losing control over this. Now, we see that there was a close encounter of two Chinese J-10 fighters. They intercepted a U.S. Navy surveillance plane flying over international waters in the East China Sea. And they're saying that, the Chinese jet came in within 300 feet or 91 meters of the American aircraft. And they're saying that the U.S. EP-3 plane, well, they had to make, a quick maneuver. But if we look at what happened with Russia and the United States, where they had F-16s flying right up to the Russian diplomat plane, they were much, much closer than these planes. But of course, they like to blow this out of proportion. And again, if there is a spy plane flying anywhere in this area near another country, you can bet that that country is going to send up the jets to find out what is going on. If China or Russia had any type of plane flying off the coast of the United States, guess what? They would launch all the jets up there to find out why this was happening. And we can see if there's any type of military plane, usually they have the transponders off, that country is going to send up jet planes to find out the intentions of this plane. And we can see that this happens pretty much almost every single time. Now, it looks like France is trying to maneuver a way to get the government of national accord to be the government of Libya. Now, they invited General Haftar. This is French President Emmanuel Macron. He invited Haftar to Paris, and he's hoping that he can convince the general to maybe join with the government of national accord, and this way the government of national accord can be recognized as the authority and influence Haftar into doing what they really want. Now, this looks like a way of trying to manipulate the situation. Again, we have to remember this government of national accord, they were brought in there by the U.S., by the coalition forces, by the UN, and the people, well, they had no choice. This government was forced upon them. Haftar has the support of the people behind him, and it looks like they're pushing to have their own government. Now, Macron is going to try to convince him to join up with the National Accord government, and we'll have to see how this plays out. Now, we can see that Iraq is out there, and they're saying, listen, the U.S. is trying to claim victory over the Islamic State in Mosul. And Vice President Nouri al-Maliki is out there saying, well, wait a minute. The U.S. contributed to the Islamic State. Now it's trying to claim victory over it. They're the ones who created it. They're the ones who funded it. They're the ones who supplied the weapons. They're the ones who guarded against it by telling the Iraqi forces to go to different areas and really not fight against the Islamic State. And he is saying the Iraqi soldiers were on the front line. They're the ones who got rid of the Islamic State. And we know this to be true. We know that the U.S., the deep state, was in there protecting the Islamic State. And this is why the Iraqi troops could never get anywhere. They say, oh, they're not prepared, they're not trained well. Yeah, they were. They were being misdirected in the fight. And we can see right now the Iraqis, well, they're on to the U.S. They're on to the deep state, I should say. And what they want now is they would like Russia to have a military presence in Iraq. They want strong relations with Russia. They would like to have a substantial presence in Iraq, politically and military. And we can see right now, this will push the United States, the deep state, out of Iraq, because all these countries, they're looking at what Russia has done. They actually fought against the Islamic State, and most of these Middle Eastern countries are starting to realize that the deep state, which was the United States at the time, they're the ones who created, they're the ones who supported, they're the ones who funded, they're the ones who directed the Islamic State, and they're the ones who brought them in. And they're starting to wise up now and say, you know something, we don't want this anymore. We see the U.S. coalition forces, they're saying, listen, once we're finished with the Islamic State, there's a lot more to do in Syria. We're not leaving anytime soon. Now, again, the Syrian government, the Russian government, and international law is going to say otherwise. Now, of course, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to drag this out with the Kurds, and they're going to try to create a conflict where the Kurds now are fighting against Assad. Once all the terrorist groups are pretty much completely defeated, and there's maybe just a small number of them around, what they're going to do is they're going to use the Kurds for the next part of their plan. And their next part of the plan is to try to divide Syria. Now, Russia has a different plan. They're using Turkey to put a lot of pressure on the Kurds. And once again, we understand that the United States is in there illegally, and according to a U.S. military spokesperson, they understand they're in there illegally. And if Russia or Syria and the UN say, listen, it's time to leave, well, if the U.S. stays, they're breaking international law. The rest of the world is going to look at this and say, what is going on here? So they're in a tough boat right now, and I can see what Russia is doing. Every time Syria and Russia, they capture an area, they're setting up these de-escalation zones, and they are now bringing in military police to make sure that these zones are secure. So as Russia and the Syrian troops and the Iranian troops move towards the east, they're setting up these zones and protecting each one of these zones, and there are Russian military police that are going to monitor these zones to make sure that these terrorist groups, these paid mercenaries, don't try to overtake them once again. And we can see this is going to back the Kurds, the deep state, into a corner. And eventually what's going to happen is they're going to have to make a decision. Because once the terrorist groups are done, once it's just the Kurds and the U.S. forces and all these bases that have now been outed, the U.S., the coalition forces, are going to have to make a decision. One, remove themselves from Syria because there's no reason for them to be there. Two, back the Kurds and fight, or have some type of an event to allow the U.S. and the coalition forces to stay. So we're going to have to watch this situation because we can see we're approaching that time period very, very quickly. And we can see the deep state, they're being dismantled in every aspect. And of course, they still have the mouthpiece, which is the corporate media. But we can see behind the scenes, there's so much going on. They're being the bad guys, the deep state, the neocons, they're all being ripped apart, and things are changing very, very rapidly. And we can see that there's a lot of changes within the Trump administration. A lot is being changed right now, and they're chipping away at the deep state. And this means the deep state, well, they only have two choices. Have some type of an event, try to basically get back what they had once before, or basically they're gone, and that's it. And we move on to the next phase. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.